The Spy TV Network presents Spy Master Reads, classic novels read to you by SrikerSly.
Hard in Hightown, a Dragon Age novel written by Varric Tethras with Mary Kirby. Part 2. The mansion was in the neighborhood the locals called the Garden. The houses along the boulevard were all covered in heavy thorn vines, and the flagstones were carpeted in moss that muffled the guardsman's footsteps and the sounds of the waves in the distance. It made the air heavy and still. It was the most expensive gloom in Kirkwall, and as the guards passed, half a dozen gardeners were out in the pre-dawn light, tying back thorns to the stone walls to make them stick, and watering the moss to keep it from drying out in the salt wind of the waking sea. The nobles instead hung metal plaques with their heraldry over the lintels of their doors. 2 houses past the rampant duck with a wing full of arrows, and left of the dragon stomping on a field of wheat, they found Dunwald's door beneath a raven with 2 pens and sailing ship, and knocked. Magistrate Dunwald's butler had the air of a man who had never risen before dawn in his life. He stared down his nose at the 2 guardsmen as if he were on some lofty balcony far above them, instead of standing in the doorway in his bare feet and dressing gown. "The magistrate is indisposed. This can wait until a reasonable hour." He gestured for the guards to leave. "The magistrate is dead," Donnen corrected him, pushing past the butler into the foyer. "Wake the household." Jevlin stepped inside uneasily and closed the door behind him. Shouldn't the captain be here?" Donnen shrugged. "You want to go back to the barracks? Be my guest." He opened the door to the parlor, and his eyes wandered across the collection displayed around the room. Embroidered tapestries covered every inch of the walls, and beneath them, a dozen ancient swords lay nestled in velvet display cases, protected from dust and prying fingers by brass-framed glass. Donnen moved to lift the lid of the nearest one. Jevlin started a sputtering protest, but then the doors to the family rooms opened. She had eyes the color of aquamarines and dark hair that fell across her brow like sword strokes. The scent of lilacs clung to her, dark and sweet like a spring evening. She strolled into the parlor with such dignified elegance that Donnen didn't realize for several moments that she was clad in a housecoat and not a ball gown. "You have news about my husband, Seamus. What's he done this time? Forget to pay his bill at the tavern?" She seated herself in a silk-upholstered armchair that looked like a close cousin to the Orlesian throne, and gestured for the guards to do the same. Donnen stood and nodded at the recruit to speak up. "No, Lady Dunwald, actually," Jevlin started. She interrupted him with a wave. "MERRIL, please." Jevlin lost all power to put words together and stared imploringly at his partner. "Lady MERRIL, your husband has been murdered," Donnen took over. "When did you see him last?" Merril's voice cracked. Murdered? Seamus?" She stared at Donnen, her jewel-colored eyes wide, but a heartbeat, maybe 2, passed, and she again became the perfect picture of noble grace. "I saw him at dinner," she said in a tone anyone might use to comment on the weather. "He left before dusk. He said he was going to play Wicked Grace with the Comte de Favre. They play every week." "Do you know of anyone who might have wanted him dead?" Jevlin managed to ask. "People want magistrates dead on principle." She gave a wry smile, but her voice grew thin as a windowpane. "Criminals, political rivals, even people in his district who didn't like his judgments." MERRIL drifted off, lost in thought, and then turned to Donnen, eyes blazing. "A week ago, a letter came. Vague threats. I thought it was nothing, but it upset Seamus." "Who sent it?" Donnen asked. "It wasn't signed, but the seal was 6 crossed swords." Her fingers tightened on the arm of the chair. Donnen was pleasantly surprised that Jevlin piped up. Do you still have the letter?" "In Seamus's desk. I'll get it for you." She rose and slipped out of the room, leaving the guards alone in the parlor. Donnen opened the empty case beside him, running a finger over the midnight blue velvet lining. "Should you be doing that?" Jevlin asked in a hushed voice, peering up at the tapestries depicting the Valerian fields hanging from the walls above them.
"What are you seeing here, guardsman?"
Donnen asked, closing the glass display and moving to another that held an ornate Navaran longsword encrusted with what appeared to be the wings of beetles. "A lot of expensive things to break," Jevlin muttered.
"Then you're not really looking. Pay attention,"
Donnen replied. The tapestry behind him showed Andraste on a burning pyre. It didn't exactly brighten up the room. MERRIL returned, barely making a sound, and held out the letter. Jevlin took it from her with a slight bow, which wasn't appropriate, but Donnen didn't correct him. Donnen was only surprised the recruit didn't kneel and try to kiss her ring, too. If you learn anything." Her poise faltered again as the words caught in her throat.
"We'll inform you at once, your ladyship,"
Donnen assured her, gesturing for Jevlin to go. She nodded silently, turned and walked away, leaving the guards to show themselves out. Back outside in the garden, the guards stopped beneath a tall street lamp, and Jevlin struggled to adjust his crooked pauldrons again. "So, now what?" Jevlin asked between clanks. "Do we write the report?" Donnen leaned against the vine-choked wall and sighed.
"As soon as that report hits the captain's desk, we're off this case. You know that, right?"
"What? Why?" Jevlin stopped trying to punch his armor back into place and stared at the older guard.
We're the ones that found nobleman's murder," Donnen interrupted him. "Gets attention. By the time he's done with breakfast, the Viscount will have half a dozen angry lords at his door demanding the killer's head. But a magistrate... Magistrates have enemies like a dog has fleas. It'll take months to investigate them all."
Donnen sighed.
"You and me? We don't have months. We have 2 weeks.
"So the captain will put someone else on the case, and in the meantime we get..." "What?" Jevlin shook his head, nearly losing his helmet in the process. His voice trembled slightly.
"More market patrols?"
Donnen made a sound of disgust halfway between a snort and a laugh.
"Only if we're lucky. I'm retiring here greener than glass, and we already screwed up the easiest detail in the city by finding this case. We probably get to play throne room decor in the Viscount's keep for a week."
But we... Jevlin sputtered, pacing back and forth in the circle of lamplight. "We're Kirkwall's guards, and this is our case!" The recruit tried to give more words to his outrage, failed and fell back on gesturing broadly at nothing in particular.
"So, we make this easy for the captain,"
Donnen grinned, trying to squash the sudden surge of pride he felt. It was bad form to praise a recruit, especially one that resembled a crashed tinker's cart as much as Jevlin did.
"It's going to be a tough case. Better if our report includes the name of the killer and his location in our dungeon. Don't you think?"
For the first time since Donnen had met him, Jevlin stood up straight. The recruit nodded, eyes blazing, and Donnen pushed himself away from the wall and headed into the night. Jevlin fell in, wordlessly, behind him.
We hope you enjoyed this chapter. See you next time.